I watched in silence as that woman poisoned my son's heart, feeding him vicious lies until he turned his back on the mother who gave him everything. I did not argue. I just prayed, knowing that whatever is done in the dark eventually meets the light of day. But when her carefully crafted mask finally shattered the horrifying truth, proved that the baby she was carrying was never even his. My name is Yvonne. I am 62 years old, a retired high school counselor, and a proud black woman who has spent her entire life nurturing her community and her family. After my beloved husband passed away, I found my peace in the beautiful suburban home we built together from the ground up. My days were quiet, filled with tending to my garden and resting in the sanctuary of the life we worked so hard to create. I thought my golden years would be a time of joy, surrounded by the sons I raised with all my love. But that peace was violently shattered during what was supposed to be a normal Thanksgiving dinner. We had just finished saying grace when my eldest son, Jamal, nervously slid a thick manila folder across the dining table toward me. He could barely look me in the eye. Standing right behind him with a cold smirk playing on her lips was his wife, Sasha. With a trembling voice, Jamal demanded that I sign over the deed to my home. He told me they had already found a cheap state-run, assisted living facility for me to move into by the end of the month. Sasha chimed in, crossing her arms and claiming that I was losing my mind and becoming a danger to myself. They sat in my house, eating the food I cooked, telling me I was no longer fit to live in my own home. When my husband passed away 15 years ago, my world stopped, but I refused to let it collapse. I was left to raise two boys, Jamal and my youngest Trey, on my own. I looked at their young, grieving faces and made a promise to God and to them. They would never lack for anything. I worked double shifts at the high school, taking on extra administrative duties and tutoring, whatever paid the bills. My hands grew tired, my back ached, but every extra hour meant $1 more for their college funds. I poured every ounce of my love, my absolute trust, and my sweat into those boys. I made sure they both graduated from university completely debt-free. I truly believed that my unwavering devotion would build an unbreakable family bond. I thought I was raising strong, grounded men who would always remember the sacrifices their mother made. Jamal was my pride and joy, the first to graduate, the first to step into the corporate world. I thought my job as a mother was a success, believing that the love I planted in his heart would weather any storm. But then Jamal met Sasha. From the very first day she stepped into my home, I felt a cold shift in the air. Sasha was all rehearsed smiles and subtle digs. She would take a bite of my famous collard greens and sweet potatoes, only to politely suggest they were a bit too heavy and outdated for her refined palate. She looked down on my suburban neighborhood, calling it quaint, but insisting Jamal deserved to live somewhere much more upscale. I tried to welcome her, opening my arms and my home, but Sasha was a master of manipulation. Over the years, she deployed a calculated campaign of gaslighting. If I offered advice, she would run to Jamal crying, twisting my words to make it sound like I was attacking her. She played the fragile victim so perfectly that Jamal would rush to defend her, slowly pulling away from me to keep the peace. Before I knew it, Sunday dinners became a rare occurrence. Phone calls dwindled to rushed text messages. Sasha systematically isolated my son from his roots, his community, and the mother who raised him. She monopolized his time, his loyalty, and his finances, making sure she was the only voice he listened to. I watched her poison my son against me drop by drop, helpless, as he chose her fabricated tears over my genuine love. Thank God I was not entirely alone in seeing through her charade. My younger son, Trey, had married a wonderful woman named Heather. Now Heather is a white American woman who grew up in the Midwest. But from the moment she joined our family, she respected our culture our traditions, and me. She possessed a fierce loyalty and an incredibly observant eye. Heather saw exactly what Sasha was doing. During family gatherings, while Sasha played the innocent victim, Heather would catch the calculating glares Sasha shot my way when Jamal was not looking. Heather was the one who noticed the strange financial demands Sasha made on Jamal, pointing out how Sasha insisted on extravagant vacations and luxury cars while complaining about money. Mama Yvonne, Heather would say to me quietly in the kitchen, "You have to be careful with Sasha. She is isolating Jamal on purpose and draining his bank accounts to keep him dependent on her." Heather noticed how Sasha intentionally excluded me from family milestones and weaponized Jamal's busy schedule to keep us apart. Having Heather in my corner was my saving grace. She fiercely protected me and validated my fears when I thought I was just being an overprotective mother. She became my crucial ally, my eyes and ears when Sasha pushed me away, and the one person who knew the impending storm was going to break us all. The real nightmare began on a Sunday afternoon when Jamal and Sasha came over for dinner. Sasha sat at my dining table, pushed away the roasted chicken I had spent all morning preparing, and placed a sonogram picture right in the center of the table. She announced she was pregnant. For a fleeting second, my heart soared. A grand baby. The joy I had dreamed of since Jamal was a little boy was finally within reach. I wanted to cry tears of happiness. But before I could even stand up to embrace my son, Sasha raised her hand to stop me. She looked at me with eyes so cold they could freeze the sun. She said they needed to talk about the future, specifically my future. Sasha crossed her arms and stated that she refused to raise her precious child in a cramped apartment. She looked around my beautiful, spacious home, the home my late husband and I built with our own sweat and tears, and declared it was the perfect place for their growing family. I asked her where she expected me to go. That was when she delivered the blow. She looked at Jamal, then back at me, and said I was becoming senile and unstable. She told my son, right to my face, that I was a danger to myself and an absolute hazard to a newborn baby. She demanded that I sign over the deed to my house and move into a cheap state-run facility immediately. If I refused, she promised I would never lay eyes on my grandchild. I looked at Jamal, waiting for the strong, principled man I raised to defend his mother. Instead, he stared at his shoes and quietly mumbled that Sasha was right, that it was time for me to step aside. I felt a physical pain in my chest, a betrayal so deep it stole my breath. I swallowed my tears. A black woman of my age knows better than to break down in front of an enemy. But as I watched Sasha smirk, a quiet suspicion took root in my mind. Why the sudden aggressive urgency to take my home right this exact minute? There had to be something more sinister behind her demand, and I was going to find out exactly what it was. 2 days later, I was cleaning out the guest bedroom, trying to keep my hands busy to stop my mind from spiraling into despair. I was packing up some of Jamal's old things when I found an old tablet he had left behind years ago. Thinking I should charge it and see if there were any old family photos saved on it, I plugged it into the wall. When the screen lit up, my heart skipped a beat. The device was still synced to Sasha's cloud account. Messages were popping up on the screen one after another, buzzing with a frantic, undeniable energy. Curiosity got the better of my manners, and I opened the messaging app. I found a constant, ongoing conversation between Sasha and a man saved under the name Dion. I sat on the edge of the bed and read through months of messages. The words I saw on that glowing screen were so wicked, so purely evil that I had to remind myself to breathe. Sasha was not just complaining about me. She was actively plotting my complete ruin with this strange man. She called me a stubborn old fool who was living too long and occupying a gold mine. She detailed her exact plan to gaslight Jamal into believing I had advanced dementia. She told Dayon that once she convinced Jamal to force me into an institution and secure the power of attorney, they would sell my beautiful home for pure cash. The most chilling part was her end goal. Sasha promised Dion that as soon as the house money hit her account, she was going to divorce my son, take half of everything he had left, and run away with Dion to start a new wealthy life. She wrote about it with such terrifying glee, treating my life and my son's heart like acceptable collateral damage for her ultimate payday. Sitting in that quiet room, holding the undeniable proof of her monstrous greed, a profound shift happened inside me. My hands trembled not out of fear, but out of sheer, unadulterated rage. I read every single text, making sure I captured screenshots of every vile word. The heavy grief that had been weighing down my shoulders simply evaporated. The sorrow of losing my son to a cruel woman was instantly replaced by an icy, focused clarity. Sasha thought she was dealing with a frail, tired widow who would just roll over and surrender to her demands. She had absolutely no idea she had just awakened a mother who would burn the world down to protect her own. I was no longer crying. I was calculating. As I scrolled further back into the message history, my eyes caught a conversation from just a few weeks prior that made my blood run completely cold. Sasha and Dion were discussing the pregnancy. Dayon was complaining about having to wait for the money, and Sasha was reassuring him. She told him to be patient because the baby was the ultimate leverage she needed to totally trap Jamal. Then she typed a sentence that shattered my reality. She laughed about how clueless my son was, reminding Dayon that Jamal was completely sterile. It was a painful medical secret Jamal had carried since his early 20s, a truth he had confided in me with immense shame and sorrow. Sasha knew this, yet she bragged to Dayon that Jamal was so desperate to be a father, he had convinced himself a miracle had happened. Sasha explicitly wrote that the baby belonged to Dayon. She was planning to steal my home, drain my son dry, and trick him into raising another man's child. I knew I could not just confront Jamal with text messages. Sasha would easily claim her account was hacked or play the victim. I needed undeniable scientific proof. I immediately called Heather, my younger son's wife, and told her everything. Heather did not hesitate for a single second. She drove straight to my house, read the messages herself, and promised we would take Sasha down together. We formed a plan. The following weekend, Sasha and Jamal hosted a backyard barbecue, and Sasha had the absolute audacity to invite Dion, introducing him to Jamal and the family as a new senior colleague from her marketing firm. Watching my son shake hands with the man who was sleeping with his wife and fathering the child she carried made me violently ill. But I played my part. I smiled, served the potato salad, and watched Dion closely. Heather was a master at work. She hovered near the patio cooler, chatting cheerfully with everyone. When Dayon finished his canned soda and tossed it onto a side table, Heather swiftly swooped in. She bagged the empty can without anyone noticing, securing the DNA sample we desperately needed. Earlier that week, I had gathered strands of Jamal's hair from his old hairbrush still sitting in my bathroom drawer. We sent both samples to a private, expedited testing facility. The waiting was sheer torture, a test of every ounce of patience God gave me. When the thick envelope finally arrived in the mail, Heather and I sat at my kitchen table to open it. I broke the seal and pulled out the crisp white paper. My eyes scanned the complex medical jargon until I found the conclusion at the very bottom of the page. Probability of paternity, 0%. It was there in black and white. Scientific confirmation of the ultimate betrayal. Sasha was nothing but a grifter, a predator who had built her entire marriage on a foundation of cruel lies. I carefully placed the paper back into the envelope and locked it in my safe. The game had fundamentally changed. I was going to dismantle her life piece by piece. She thought her plan was foolproof. She thought she held all the cards. But she was about to find out exactly what happens when you underestimate the quiet strength of a mother who knows the truth. I could have shattered right there in my guest bedroom. I could have screamed until my lungs gave out or thrown that devastating truth right in my son's face. But a woman who has survived the storms I have knows that anger without a plan is just empty noise. I folded that piece of paper, placed it securely inside my safe, and locked the heavy metal door. I wiped my face, stood up tall, and decided right then and there that Sasha was going to learn a lesson she would carry to her grave. But to catch a predator, you have to play the prey. The next time Jamal and Sasha came over to discuss my transition into that cheap assisted living facility, I put on the performance of a lifetime. I shuffled my feet when I walked to the front door. I let my shoulders slump. I kept my voice weak and shaky, staring at the floor like a defeated, exhausted old woman who had finally given up the fight. Sasha ate it up. I could see the wicked gleam of triumph in her eyes as she patted my hand with that fake syrupy sweetness, telling me it was all for the best. She actually had the nerve to measure my living room for new curtains while I was sitting right there. I just nodded and smiled, thanking her for taking such good care of my affairs. I let her believe she had completely broken me. But the very next morning, while Sasha and Jamal were busy picking out paint colors for my master bedroom, I drove downtown to meet with my wealth manager and my attorney. They had known my late husband and me for decades. When I sat in that plush leather chair and explained exactly what my daughter-in-law was trying to do, my attorney was absolutely appalled. I handed him the stack of financial documents and told him it was time to move everything I owned into an ironclad, irrevocable trust. I owned this sprawling estate, 3 commercial properties in the city, and a hefty investment portfolio that my husband and I had built quietly over 40 years. But there was one piece of property Sasha knew nothing about. 3 years ago, when Jamal and Sasha were desperate for a place to live, they rented a luxury downtown condo. They thought they were paying a corporate property management company. They had absolutely no idea that I was the silent owner of that condo through a limited liability company. I had bought it to secure my son's future, heavily subsidizing their rent every single month so they could live in luxury while I stayed completely in the background. I looked my attorney dead in the eye and told him to sever it all. Every single asset, every bank account, every piece of real estate was legally locked away where Sasha and Jamal could never touch it. I instructed him to prepare a 30-day eviction notice for their luxury condo and to immediately cancel the monthly financial subsidies I had been funneling into Jamal's accounts. I sat in that quiet, sunlit office and signed paper after paper. With every stroke of my pen, I was cutting off their financial lifelines. By the time I walked out of that building, I felt 10 feet tall. I was no longer a grieving mother waiting to be discarded. I was a fortress. I had legally stripped them of everything they thought they were entitled to, and they were completely oblivious. With my assets fully secured, it was time to set the trap. I needed a stage grand enough for the truth. A place where Sasha could not simply run away or twist the narrative. I picked up my phone and called her, making sure my voice trembled with a manufactured sadness. I told her that since I would be moving into the facility soon, I wanted to do one last beautiful thing for the family. I offered to host and fully pay for a lavish, extravagant baby shower right here at my estate. I called it my farewell gift to her and the new baby. I knew Sasha's vanity could never resist a free high-end party where she could show off the house she believed she had successfully stolen. She gasped with fake delight and immediately accepted, her voice dripping with artificial gratitude. I told her to spare absolutely no expense. I insisted she invite her entire extended family, all her flashy friends, and her entire social circle. I wanted the house packed to the brim. Then, keeping my tone perfectly casual, I mentioned that Jamal had spoken highly of his new colleague Dayon. I suggested she invite him as well, saying we should celebrate Jamal's expanding professional network and make him feel welcome in our home. I could almost hear Sasha smiling through the phone. She took the bait hook, line, and sinker. She probably thought she was the smartest woman in the world, getting her mother-in-law to fund a party where she could flaunt her husband and her secret lover in the same room. Over the next 3 weeks, Sasha treated my home as if I had already moved out and died. She brought in expensive event planners, paraded catering teams through my kitchen, and had massive floral arrangements delivered daily. She ordered a custom ice sculpture and rented velvet lounge chairs for the backyard. Every time she walked through my front doors, she acted like the new lady of the manor. She would casually point out my antique furniture to her friends, loudly discussing which dumpsters she was going to throw my things into once I was gone. It took every ounce of restraint I possessed not to throw her out on the street right then. But my younger son, Trey, and his wife, Heather, were my anchors. Heather came over every single day to help me maintain my composure. When Sasha demanded that I move my family heirlooms out of the living room to make space for a photo booth, Heather was the one who gripped my hand and whispered that the payoff would be worth the pain. I spent my evenings sitting in my husband's old leather armchair, looking at the life we built, praying for strength. I asked God to forgive me for the wrath I was about to bring down upon my own son's household. But I knew I had to break Jamal's illusion so he could finally see the truth. Heather was instrumental during those long weeks. She managed the guest list, ensuring that Sasha's most judgmental aunts and gossiping cousins definitely attended. Heather even went out of her way to personally confirm Dion's attendance, sending him a VIP parking pass just to stroke his ego. Dayon was just as arrogant as Sasha, assuming he had outsmarted us all. I watched them all operate with such brazen disrespect in my own sanctuary. They thought my silence was weakness. They mistook my patience for surrender. By the time the final invitations were sent and the caterers were confirmed, the trap was flawlessly and perfectly laid. The day of the baby shower finally arrived, bringing with it a thick, suffocating tension that you could cut with a knife. The estate looked like something out of a luxury magazine. Towering displays of white and gold balloons arched over the grand entryway, and the scent of expensive catered food drifted through the halls. Sasha paraded around the main living room in a lavish, form-fitting emerald gown, a glittering tiara resting on her head. She was in her absolute glory, barking orders at the catering staff and snapping her fingers at the servers as if she were royalty. I stood near the kitchen island wearing a simple, dignified navy dress, quietly observing the circus. Sasha made it a point to mock me in front of her friends. She pointed her manicured finger at me from across the room, loudly telling a group of her cousins how relieved she was that the old lady was finally leaving so they could modernize this dusty old museum. Her friends laughed, sipping their champagne and looking at me with absolute pity. I simply maintained my calm, offering them warm smiles and serving drinks, playing the part of the frail, accommodating host. Jamal stood near the fireplace, looking incredibly uncomfortable. He kept adjusting his collar and glancing at me with a heavy, guilty expression. He knew what his wife was doing was wrong, yet he remained absolutely silent, sipping his water and avoiding my eyes. His weakness broke my heart all over again, but it only solidified my resolve. He needed this harsh awakening just as much as Sasha did. About an hour into the party, Dayon strolled through the front doors. He was wearing a sharp, tailored suit, acting incredibly cocky, as he handed Sasha a lavishly wrapped gift. The way they looked at each other, the subtle brush of his hand against her lower back, it was sickening. Jamal was standing less than 10 feet away, completely oblivious to the fact that the man shaking his hand was the actual father of the child they were supposedly celebrating. Heather and Trey were moving with absolute precision. While the guests were distracted by the towering chocolate fountains and the jazz music playing through the speakers, Trey quietly walked to the front of the property. He closed the heavy iron estate gates and engaged the electronic lock. Nobody was leaving this property until I was completely finished. Meanwhile, Heather was in the grand living room, casually adjusting the massive projector screen Sasha had rented to display her ultrasound photos. Heather smoothly swapped the input cables, connecting the main display directly to a hidden laptop we had prepared the night before. She gave me a subtle nod from across the room, tapping her watch. The tension in my chest was razor sharp, a tight coil of righteous anger and sorrow ready to snap. The house was packed with over 100 guests. Sasha's parents, her siblings, Jamal's friends, and Dayon were all gathered in the center of the room, laughing and clapping as the music faded down. Sasha grabbed a microphone, her voice echoing through the grand living room as she commanded everyone's attention for the main toast. She thanked everyone for coming to her new home, emphasizing the word new with a malicious smirk directed right at me. She went on and on about the beautiful future she and Jamal were building. Sasha actually tried to step in front of me to block my path to the center of the room, her fake smile straining at the edges. She hissed under her breath, telling me to go sit down before I embarrassed myself. I did not blink. I did not flinch. I simply stepped around her with the grace of a woman who holds all the keys. The crowd hushed, expecting a tearful, emotional goodbye from the retiring grandmother. Dayon was leaning against the back wall, swirling his drink with a smug grin, waiting for the show. Jamal finally stepped forward, looking worried, asking if I was feeling well enough to speak. I looked at my son, truly looked at him, and felt the last tether of my protective coddling snap. I had shielded him from the world for his entire life, but I could not shield him from the truth any longer. The time for acting was officially over. I signaled to Heather. It was time to bring down the house. I walked to the front of the grand living room, my heels clicking softly against the hardwood floor. The chatter began to die down as I picked up the microphone. I tapped it gently, and the room fell completely silent. All eyes turned to me. Sasha stood off to the side, wearing that smug, triumphant smirk, practically vibrating with the anticipation of me announcing my departure to a nursing home. Jamal looked down at his shoes, unable to meet my gaze. I took a deep breath, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make them uncomfortable. I looked directly at Sasha and told the crowd I had a very special presentation for the mother-to-be. I raised the small black remote in my hand and pressed the button. The heavy velvet curtains parted and the massive projector screen lowered from the ceiling. Sasha clapped her hands together, assuming this was the expensive three-dimensional ultrasound video she had demanded. But the moment the projector flashed to life, the image on the screen was not a baby. It was a massive, crystal-clear screenshot of her text messages, the very messages where she coldly plotted to throw me into a state-run facility, drain my accounts, sell my home, and run away with her lover. A collective gasp echoed through the room. I pressed the button again, flipping to the next screenshot, where she explicitly detailed how she manipulated Jamal, mocking his blind loyalty. Sasha dropped her champagne glass. The crystal shattered loudly against the floor, but nobody moved. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, but no words came out. The room was paralyzed in absolute shock. I did not give her a single second to invent a lie. I pressed the remote one last time. The screen transitioned to a highly magnified, officially stamped laboratory document. It was the DNA test result Heather and I had secured. I spoke into the microphone, my voice ringing out with total authority, completely steady and devoid of tears. I read the document out loud for the guests in the back. Probability of paternity 0%. I turned my head slowly, locking eyes with Dion, who had suddenly frozen near the chocolate fountain. I announced to the entire room that Jamal was not the father of the child Sasha was carrying, and that the real father was standing right there in the corner, holding a plate of my catered food. The silence that followed was so heavy, it felt like it could crush the foundation of the house. I watched Sasha stare at the massive screen, the undeniable proof of her vile infidelity and greed, shining brightly for her entire family, her friends, and my son to see. The mask had completely shattered, and there was absolutely nowhere for her to hide. Absolute chaos erupted the moment the reality of the screen set in. Sasha let out a blood-curdling scream, lunging toward the audio-visual cart in a frantic, pathetic attempt to unplug the projector. She was pulling at wires and knocking over floral arrangements, but the image remained brightly illuminated for all to see. Dion realized the walls were closing in and immediately turned to make a run for the back patio doors. But Heather and Trey were already there. My fierce daughter-in-law and my loyal youngest son stood shoulder to shoulder, blocking his only exit. Trey shoved Dion backward, forcing him right into the center of the room to face the music. Jamal was standing frozen, staring at the screen with an expression of pure, unadulterated devastation. The medical secret he had carried with so much shame, his sterility, was suddenly laid bare, weaponized by the woman he had chosen over his own mother. When he finally looked at Sasha, his knees buckled. My strong, successful son dropped to the floor, completely broken by the realization that his wife had used his deepest insecurity to betray him. He had almost thrown away his devoted mother for an absolute monster. Sasha crawled toward him, her emerald gown dragging on the floor, weeping fake tears and begging him to listen to her. She tried to claim the texts were doctored, that it was a sick prank, but her own parents were already moving toward the front door. I watched Sasha's mother shake her head in absolute disgust, refusing to even look at her daughter as she walked out of my house. The flashy friends Sasha had invited to show off her impending wealth were whispering and backing away as fast as they could. Dayon was stammering, trying to deny his involvement, but the text messages on the screen clearly showed his eager participation in the plot to steal my home. The beautiful baby shower had transformed into a courtroom of public opinion, and Sasha was universally condemned. The sheer humiliation of being exposed in front of her entire social circle was a punishment far worse than anything I could have ever said to her. I walked slowly toward the center of the room, my heels parting the remaining crowd, until I stood directly over Sasha. She was still sobbing on the floor, mascara running down her face. I reached into my bag and pulled out the thick legal folder I had prepared with my attorney. I dropped it right onto her lap. I spoke loudly, ensuring every remaining guest heard my final judgment. I told Sasha that the folder contained a 30-day eviction notice for the luxury downtown condo she loved so much. Her eyes widened in shock as I revealed that I was the silent owner of that property, and I had been paying the majority of her rent for years. I explained that every single asset I owned was now locked in an irrevocable trust. She would not get a single dime of my money, nor would she ever set foot in my house again. I pointed to the front door and told her to get out immediately. Sasha tried to plead, looking around for anyone to defend her, but she found only cold stares. She gathered her ruined gown and practically ran out the front door, with Dayon scrambling right behind her to escape the humiliation. Jamal was still on the floor, weeping silently. He looked up at me, his eyes filled with a desperate, agonizing regret. He grabbed my hand and begged for my forgiveness. He cried that he was so sorry, that he had been completely blinded and manipulated. I looked down at the boy I had sacrificed my entire life to raise. My heart ached for his pain. But a mother's love must also contain boundaries. I gently pulled my hand from his grasp. I told Jamal that I would always love him, but I refused to enable his weakness any longer. I told him he had to leave my house, figure out his own life, and rebuild his character from the ground up. He needed to learn what it meant to be a man who respects the people who truly care for him. I watched my son walk out the door, knowing that while my heart was bruised, my spirit had never been stronger. I had protected my legacy, my dignity, and my peace, and nobody would ever take that away from me again. Today, as I sit in the quiet peace of my beautiful garden, tending to my roses, I finally feel completely free. The heavy storm has passed, and my home is a sanctuary once again. This entire ordeal taught me a profound and painful truth. A mother's love is truly limitless, a deep well that never runs dry, but we must never allow that precious love to become a weapon used against our own dignity. We are taught that blood ties bind us forever, but I have learned that blood simply makes you related. It is mutual respect, honesty, and unwavering loyalty that actually make you true family. Setting ironclad boundaries against those who wish to exploit you is never an act of cruelty. It is the highest form of self-love and absolute survival for an older woman. Always protect your peace, your joy, and your very kind, open heart. If you liked my story, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and let me know in the comments exactly where you are watching from and what time it is there. I would truly love to read your thoughts. I will see you in the next story. Take care.